Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of Behind the Build, Clearstory's first podcast. Our goal of this podcast is simple. We want to sit down with real people working in the industry and hear their stories. Today, I'm excited to kick off the podcast with one of my close friends, Ryan Wall, who's the CEO of Silicon Valley Mechanical, one of the largest mechanical companies in Northern California. And we're going to hear Ryan's story of how he started his career, how he bought a construction company doing about 20 million a year in revenue and scaled it to over 600 million, and what that journey was like along the way. I found this personally interesting because back when I was a general contractor project manager, I had aspirations of starting my own company in the industry, and I had no idea where to start. And so today we're going to hear really in detail what it takes to set yourself up to take that leap, what it looks like to actually go through that process, and then a lot of the leadership lessons along the way of going through that growth journey and growing a business from 20 to 600 million a year, which is pretty incredible. We also talk about AI, building culture and value within your company, and a bunch of other cool stuff along the way. We're excited to kick this podcast off. Well, welcome to the first ever episode of Behind the Build, Clearstory's first podcast. We talked ourselves into doing a podcast, and my big thing of starting a podcast was I really wanted to talk to people in the industry behind the build, starting companies, leading companies, checking in on changes in the industry and things like that. And so super excited today to have Ryan Wall here, who's the CEO of Silicon Valley Mechanical. Also happens to be one of my close friends, which makes the first episode that much easier to get off the ground and running. Ryan, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
So we met back in 2009.
Yep.
And would you have guessed that you and I would be sitting in Walnut Creek, California at Clearstory's office on a podcast?
Absolutely not. This has been such a wild ride. I'm watching you and your company grow. My company grow. I never thought it would be what it is today. Like, rewind even 5 years ago, there's no way I would have thought we'd be 1,000+ employees, 600 million a year in revenue, being located in 3 different geographically distinct areas. Never would have thought that back in 2009.
Yeah, no, it's been incredible to watch. And yeah, I mean, Silicon Valley Mechanical is a pretty well-known company in the Bay Area, but outside the Bay, probably less well-known. Do you want to give like a quick background on you and
Sure.
SVM, and then we can maybe rewind the clock a little bit?
Yep. So graduated Cal Poly in 2004. Spent a very short time at Lockheed Martin just because of the .com hadn't quite recovered yet. So that's only where I could get a job. My dad was a 393 pipe fitter for 35 years. He heard that the company that he was working for possibly hired engineers. And so I applied and got a job at Air Systems, where he was a field worker, straight into their engineering department. So I spent 3 years as a pure engineer, designing HVAC systems. And they had been sold once before. Prior to my arrival there, John Davis, the original founder, had bought it back from that company. I forget the name of it, who it is exactly. But right around my 3rd year anniversary, he had resold it to MCOR. MCOR is a big, roll up. They've got a lot of companies. And I knew throughout my entire career, I never really wanted to work for this, massive corporate deal where I was literally logging in with an employee number as opposed to a name.
Yeah.
And it was just not the vibe that I wanted. So right around my 3rd year anniversary, Blaine Flickner, who's currently one of my business partners, reached out to me. He was at a smaller firm that had more or less just gotten started. So in 2007, I made the switch and moved over into working for Blaine as a more or less an estimator. So I spent 2 years estimating every day, just taking off jobs and putting together proposals, cost estimates, and really putting my engineering skills to the test, because being in the design build world, you don't get plans that are fully baked. A lot of times they're 50%, or
You wouldn't say.
yeah, even the plan spec jobs are not that great. But being able to fill in gaps and then layer on the estimating component was what I spent a few years doing. And then in 2009, when I met you, was really when I was starting to get my feet wet as a project manager. And so one of Blaine's biggest clients, who became my biggest client, was Apple. You and I spent, 3 or 4 years just grinding through. Apple had invented the iPhone at the time. They were bringing on iTunes. So they were expanding like crazy when nobody else in the Valley really
Yeah, the iPod was scaling.
The iPod was scaling.
Or had scaled. Yeah.
So they were huge, and that work was hard to come by, especially after 2008. And with that big crash, really Apple was the predominant builder, and so was Google to a large extent. But my primary client was Apple.
Yeah. It's actually amazing. I didn't know that that's right when you had just started being a PM, because I thought you had done it for a long time, because you were quite easy to work with. And I think you mentioned Cal Poly. We're both Cal Poly, you know, that learn by doing kind of mentality that they really do a good job of ingraining in you. Is that kind of how it was for you becoming a PM, is like taking the skill set you had of being an engineer, then an estimator, and now it's like, okay, I got this foundation. I'm going to go figure out how to be a PM, or how did that come about?
With any PM, regardless of the industry that you're in, and it's a hard skill set to teach, but communication is key, right? Over communicating something with the team, no matter who they are, whether they're a client or they work for you or with you, and in the field, is communicating to them when there's been a change, when there's a problem, when something's due, not trying to hide anything, and just working together as a team really is what being a project manager is. And that has always come naturally to me. I don't know why. It has. In childhood, I was in Boy Scouts. I ended up being the troop leader and went all the way through to get my Eagle Scout.
Same here, by the way.
Good job. I mean, there's no surprise, right? A couple Eagle Scout CEOs.
Yeah.
But I think that those skills that were taught to us at a young age, like, really translate into what we do today, which is purely just communication.
Yep.
Even as me at the CEO level, it's a strategic initiative. Every year we talk about it, that we're transparent with all of our employees, no matter what it is and what it's about. Twice a year, we offer a what's new and what's next. And I let literally people ask me anything. They do this anonymously. There's a lot of weird questions. A lot of, can we get a new sauna? Can we get a cold plunge in the gym?
The important stuff.
The important stuff. But people do get to ask me things that ideally I can be as transparent as possible, like how we're doing financially, what our backlog looks like, who our big clients are. When there were rumors about us expanding into Sacramento and Reno, I was able to use that as a forum to over communicate who we are as a company, what we're doing, where we're headed. And I think that gives a lot of people peace of mind. So no different on the project management side. If you're communicating problems, you're communicating delays, you're communicating these things as opposed to trying to hide from them, people just want to work with you.
Yeah. No, 100%. So you're working with Blaine. Yeah. What was kind of the next steps in transition?
Yeah. So then my other partner today, Brian Pyle, he started with the other company probably like around 2011 or 12. He was at another smaller mechanical contractor and decided that he wanted to sort of like join forces with Blaine and me. I was competing a lot with Brian at Apple. He was like my main competitor, and he thought he'd be better off working with me than against me. So he joined, right around 2011 or 12. And both him and I had an agreement with our previous employer that when we hit the level of project executive, that we would be offered the opportunity for ownership shares. And when that became evident that was never going to happen, Brian and I decided to leave. This is right around the end of 2013. I was feeling super guilty about this because Blaine had hired me. He had mentored me. Blaine was already an owner at that other company. And when the two of us decided that we were going to go on and do something else, I took Blaine to lunch and let him know that we were leaving. And he, for his own reasons, had decided that he wasn't a fit anymore at the previous employer, and he wanted to join us. So at the end of 2013, we kind of had a couple of options. One was stick it out. Two was start from scratch, which we went at great lengths exploring. And three was, exploring the idea of joining or buying a smaller company that existed, and kind of using the foundation of having an IT infrastructure, phones, an HR person, maybe, some employees already being signatory to the union, having a contractor's license as like a springboard for us to get started. So we actually, the three of us formed a sort of a ghost entity. Blaine and I went to Cal Poly. Brian went to Stanford, so he's a Cardinal. So we formed a company called Cardinal Mustangs, and we used an attorney essentially to reach out as a proxy to 4 or 5 companies that were at SVM's size. So around 20 million, generally single owner. Maybe they were a little bit older. They didn't have a succession plan, and got a sense for who was interested. Turned out Elias was highly interested, did not have a succession plan. His son didn't really have an interest in taking over the business after. He had been struggling, the last 3 or 4 years prior to us joining with maintaining around 20 million a year, and saw this as an opportunity for him to A, have an exit plan, and B, have like 3 pretty solid partners in the business with, extensive engineering backgrounds, obviously great customer contacts. And so we effectively bought 75% of the business January 2nd of 2014 and started that day.
So from point of where you have this idea to leave to the point where you form the, top secret Cardinal Mustang Corporation, like how much time did that take? And then like, how did you guys figure all that out? Because I think that's why it's so interesting to have you tell the story is there's so many people who are in the industry who have that entrepreneurial spirit or maybe want to do something bigger, but they just like, I was in the same boat. Like I didn't know how to get started. Like I wouldn't have known to think and go do that. So how long did that take? And then how did you guys did you know that this was a path doing that type of corporation, or did you get legal advice? Like how did you guys figure it out?
We got legal advice. We had a very, very trusted advisor, Bernie Vogel, who's no longer in the industry, was an M&A attorney. And he advised us early on that M&As can get really ugly really fast if you're trying to dive into looking at books and looking back in time, especially in a construction company where there's ups and downs, there's good jobs, there's bad jobs. Employees may come and go, and really like, what are you buying when you buy a construction company? And you're buying people, you're buying backlog that you may or may not know is good, and you're buying the reputation, so the goodwill component of it. So when we approached Elias, we had gotten very good advice from Bernie that you don't want to mess around with like what the business is worth. We were coached on what the business could be worth bringing us on. So when we, like I said, effectively bought 75% of the business, we basically bought the goodwill of SVM. It's $100,000. We literally bought the assets. So there was an asset list of trucks and tools and, what little office furniture he had. So those are easy things to point out. And then we couldn't decide on the backlog component or the people component. So we literally set up a new company. So SVM had an old set of books, and from basically May 1st of 2014 forward, anything new that was booked was NewCo SVM. There's a lot of nuance to that in that we had to essentially set up a whole new entity, a new S Corp. We tried to get the contractor's license to transfer over. That was just such a pain in California that I ended up retaking the test. And so SVM, new SVM had its own HVAC contractor's license. And it was literally a new company. So anything that Elias had prior was his. We helped him run it as like a part of this good faith effort, got the jobs done, essentially shut down old SVM, and new SVM was basically born May 1st, 2014. And that we all did together.
Yeah. So the NewCo, you guys are basically equal partners for the 4 of you, more or less.
Yeah. At the detail. 25% each from May 1st forward.
Yep. Yeah. And then in terms of, so as it turns out, I mean, I'm sure that the asset list was a fair amount of capital. Did you guys pull your money together? Did you guys get investors?
Yeah.
How'd you guys go about that part?
No investors. Blaine was in a fortunate position where he came from, that he was a prior owner, so he was bought out. So he had an okay amount of cash. I personally had to leverage my house. I had to borrow money from every aunt and uncle I've ever met. I did get a personal loan from a bank. Brian ended up selling one of his properties to be able to finance all this. And we didn't take salaries.
Nice.
So for 2 years, we had no salary. And what little money I did have coming in from my now wife, who was supporting me at the time, was
one of my coworkers. So I'm familiar with what that salary was.
Yeah. Was going towards paying at least interest back. So the sacrifice there was, at the time, was big. Obviously it's paid off and it was the right thing to do, but I never hesitated that this was going to be something that I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, you're all in.
I'm all in.
When I started my company, I spent a lot of time with you, and you were very instrumental in convincing me to like take the plunge and do it. And I met with another friend, and he gave me the classic speech of just once you your boats are in the harbor. You've got to storm the beach, and then at night you got to go back and just burn the boats. You got to be all in, and that's basically what you guys did. And when you guys were exploring all this, I assume you mentioned you also considered just starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And hindsight, probably a good thing you didn't do that. Although I'm sure you guys would have figured it out. But what was the reason you guys didn't decide to take that approach? Is it just more capital, more like too much upfront building a new brand from scratch? Like, what was the main reason?
I've had a couple friends that have started construction companies from scratch. Ernesto Barron with Barron Builders, he chose to take the leap from one of our bigger clients at Apple at the time and start his own deal. He's doing well today, but I'd say for the first 5 years, there's a huge struggle in essentially setting up all that infrastructure I mentioned, like having an HR department, having an IT infrastructure, figuring out your ERP system. Those are huge pains. We had something to start with. Granted, they were all broken and they have all been replaced. There isn't one thing that's like legacy SVM that exists today, but it allowed the three of us to play into our strengths, which was design, build, selling, running HVAC work. And that essentially meant that in 2014, we took a $20 million company in 1 year to a 40 million. So doubling its revenue. Whereas if we started from 0 to 20, that's a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
It's easier to double 20 than it is to double 0. And so when we were weighing these things, like really focusing on those smaller, companies that had one owner, ideally they were a little older, they had no succession plan, was really where we honed in on. Again, we got a lot of good advice from Bernie.
Yeah. Well, had you tried to do 20 million a year or add 20 million a year to a business that is starting from nothing, probably wouldn't have even been possible.
Yeah.
Like you probably would have had to spend 6-12 months just setting up that infrastructure and really so you could even support that volume of projects.
Sure.
What was like the first day like?
The first day was really interesting. There are still remnants of the old office there. So like whenever I walk back there and see it, brings back a lot of memories of walking through the door the first day. Elias wasn't the most organized person. So when we walked in there, there's boxes everywhere. It was, January 2nd or 3rd on the day we started. So Christmas had just happened. And so like his client gift baskets and extras that hadn't been like delivered yet were just everywhere. And we literally had no place to sit. So we went into the only conference room that he had at the time and I cleaned it up. I put stuff in boxes and organized it so that I could actually sit down. We then spent the next week interviewing people just to understand who they are, what they do. And there were
interviewing people inside the company,
interviewing people within the company.
Yeah.
Basically announced at that first day, like this was happening.
Was this like office space? Like, what would you say you do here?
It was very Bob-like.
Probably didn't want to like scare people as well. Like, these new owners are here.
There were a few that were intimidated and didn't know what the hell was going on, right? But for the most part, people were excited.
Yeah.
There were a few that weren't, and they self-selected out pretty quickly. He only had 12 office employees.
Yeah.
A few were family members in a small business. It's not surprising.
Yep.
His sister, who's our controller, and she still works there. She's actually retiring in November, but she'll have been there for 25 years. And then we interviewed kind of the superintendents that were running the field, that were in the office, but were literally separated by a wall, which we'll talk about later is a big cultural problem.
Yeah.
But then we kind of got an idea of what people were doing, and we just decided to play to their strengths and ideally put them in the right spots.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Did you ever and when you came in, I can't remember how you guys organized roles and things like that, but did you ever have imposter syndrome or being because it's going from project executive to like running a company, you're working primarily in the business. Now you have to work on this new business and scale it and figure a bunch of things out. How did you personally kind of handle all this?
That is definitely where I'm at today. In the last 2 years, the imposter syndrome is absolutely real. Elias formally retired in 2019. I officially took over the CEO role. That said, Brian and Blaine, Brian being the COO and Blaine being the president, we've all had equal responsibility. So CEO by title, but I'm not doing this at the helm of the ship. Blaine is retiring effectively October 1st, September 30th, which is what lines up with our fiscal year. So he's excited. Brian and I, over the last 2 years, by design, have essentially taken over his duties. So the last year or so that he's in the office, he really doesn't have many responsibilities, have all been shifted. So to your point, the last 2 years have really been me focusing on it rather than in it. I rarely bid stuff anymore. I don't project management for sure. And when I do, it's bad.
That's a sign that it's going well.
Yeah, exactly.
Or hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. But that's, I never thought I'd be here ever. I always thought I would be in a sales project management sort of role. I just didn't realize when you get to a certain size that these departments need strategic direction.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are scared to make decisions. And so if you just give them some sort of direction, they're happy to go in that direction, but they don't even know which way to turn.
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like where Blaine and I have been super effective with the success of SVM is giving it direction.
Yeah, no, 100%. So today you're at like 600 million, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Actually, until we caught up before this morning, I thought you guys were at like 400 million, which I thought was incredible.
Yeah.
What did you think? Where did you think you'd be when you guys bought into it?
So when we put together a business plan, before even we had SVM, the companies we identified were all in that 20 million. Our 10-year plan was to get to 200. So 10x growth, which we hit in like 4 years.
Yeah.
It's not lost on me though, that's highly market dependent. That said, we've ever done is reinvest into the company, and it not just the people, but infrastructure. This industry has changed dramatically in terms of the types of jobs we see. When we first started, a lot of tenant improvement work, not a whole ton of ground up because of the .com bust. Like they had built a lot of buildings that were sitting vacant. So taking an existing building and reworking it for a new tenant was the predominant work for the first 5 years of our existence. Fast forward to 2019 with COVID, and then the explosion of life science type buildings. Well, your typical office space can't handle life science work. So for a good 5-year period, we saw a lot of ground up work solely focused around, life science tenants. Today, the AI boom is happening. It's real. I think I heard the spend on AI this year alone is going to be close to $7 trillion.
Yeah.
60% of that's infrastructure. So the buildings, the power, the mechanical. And these buildings and the power draw are not small, which means the cooling not small. And so predominantly piping heavy jobs that require some pretty sophisticated tooling that fortunately we've made some big investment into our pipe shop, our shop capabilities. We've expanded as much as we possibly can physically in San Jose by essentially taking over as tenants moved out of the building we were in, taking over, expanding and increasing capabilities there that have put us in a position where we can do these bigger jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we'd be allowed to have a podcast and not talk about AI. But before we go there for a second, you mentioned like the people side too, which I think probably part of one of your advantages, mine to a degree, but at the same time, I didn't start a construction company, which is my background, which maybe would have been more logical. I started a software company, so I had to learn a lot of different things to kind of understand how to scale the people side. But for you, having been kind of full cycle, right? You started as an engineer, then an estimator, then PM, then PX. You worn a lot of the hats of the people you're now training and leading. But how did you take the values you guys wanted to set and lead and I guess from day one, try to instill them into a business that already probably had some set of values and behaviors? And then how did you scale it beyond there?
It's like I mentioned, you were talking about the first day, and there was a physical wall between the office and the field leadership. And given that my dad was a 35-year pipe fitter, he always complained about the us and them mentality of the office and the field. And it was very important to me, to Brian and to Blaine, whose dad was very similar to mine, 40-year guy, 393, different company. But breaking down the physical barrier that separated the office from the field and integrating them into what we do as PMs, and then us understanding what they do day to day in the field. Because as a project manager, your job is really to service up and down.
Yep.
We're just removing roadblocks.
Yeah.
A lot of paper movement, and we're making some decisions. Obviously, financial decisions with change orders and, when we're ordering equipment and things like that. But at the end of the day, those guys are doing the install, they're doing the startup, they're doing the test and balance. And then, service wise afterwards, they have to be able to service this stuff. So did we consider service access and things of that nature? Getting the input of the field was a paramount culture shift of SVM. And I do believe that is one of our biggest success stories, is that we were kind of one of the early adopters of having the field be an integral part of the day-to-day decision-making of the PM group, and then letting them know, kind of where we were at as a PM as well, in terms of, like I said, over communicating when there's a delay in something or a change early, so that they can understand that and then work through it.
Yep. Did you ever actually work like in the field, like with your dad or in college?
Yeah.
Or anything like that?
So through high school, during the summers, I interned for Kinetics one summer, for Therma for 2 summers. Both were in the field.
Yep.
I was a non-union guy, so I couldn't hang duct or install pipe, but I could sweep floors.
You could sweep the crap out of a floor.
Sweep the crap out of a floor. I ended up being in the tool repair room, so I repaired a lot of impact wrenches and bandsaws and things like that. The last summer that I was there, we implemented a tool watch program to be able to track tools and where they were at on job sites to get them back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the, whenever I get an opportunity to talk to construction management kids in college and things like that, and it's such an amazing thing that Cal Poly Construction Management or Chico or any of these other national construction management programs, you have such an amazing opportunity to intern with these big, large, sophisticated general contractors, and it can be a great experience. But I really encourage kids to, while you're in college, while you're young, take the most entry level job and try and get on a field crew and actually experience the industry from the ground up. I didn't know a ton about construction. My dad wasn't in construction, and I remember getting accepted to Cal Poly's construction management program and saying to myself, construction management, I'm going to manage construction. And I was like, I feel like I should probably have done construction in my life to do that role. And I'm so glad I had that. For whatever reason, I had that thought or idea. And I did the same thing. I worked for a wood framing company up in Sacramento and literally swept floors. Eventually I got to go out on site. It was non-union, so I could go actually wear bags and swing a hammer and do that kind of stuff. But just a couple summers I did that. I mean, I feel like I still leverage that experience today.
Yeah.
That's probably what led you to tear down these walls.
Exactly. Today, both SMACNA and ASHRAE have field programs. When I was graduating, they didn't, just because of the economy.
Yeah.
But we definitely, to your point, we definitely encourage, kids to go into the field. They are allowed to install stuff if they're part of the SMACNA, which is the sheet metal contractors of North America. If they're signed up through that internship program, they can actually physically do stuff, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
For interns that are coming through college that don't want to do that, we always put them on a job site. I don't want to stick them in the office. I want them to see what we do. I want them to see the importance of coordinating with other trades, over communicating, working with the field guys. Like I said, ultimately, we're servicing them. They are not servicing us. And so getting that in an internship is highly, highly important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess, I've got a bunch of other questions, but I mean, I guess transitioning from people into AI, which is the interesting intersection we're at these days. What's this future going to look like? Yeah. Obviously, we're both benefiting from the boom in AI because there's tons of construction happening. I mean, Clearstory is used across data centers all across the country, and it's pretty unbelievable what's being built out. But all that stuff that's being built out is so that it can power software and robots and all sorts of things and cars and all sorts of stuff in the future that we're going to wind up using. But I think construction company and the industry is at a unique kind of inflection point. How are you thinking about it internally? I guess maybe just start internally.
So internally, we do have an AI steering committee. We try to have a different person from each department within that committee that is at least thinking about it. We've taken on some early adoption stuff. It's not where everyone thinks it is today. So not worried about it in that it's going to replace a bunch of jobs. Where we have implemented it and it's useful, not job replacement, but useful, is in our safety department. We're utilizing an AI app that essentially allows our field guys to have a interactive dialogue when we're doing our toolbox talks in the mornings, or stretch and flex, or an incident report. So rather than a foreman having to spend time, writing something down, and maybe they're busy, and so they truncate certain details, the AI is smart enough to know that this has been truncated, and let's ask more questions. And then they can also do that while they're driving, via Bluetooth on their phone to save time. So we're getting better, more thought out job hazardous analysis methods and procedures when we're doing something hazardous. Again, if there's an incident, the incident's better documented. And so that isn't necessarily a replacement. It's an improvement. The other big improvement is on our accounting side. It could do any WIP analysis in terms of, job fade analysis when it comes to GP degradation. We can look at over under billings really simply, and get an idea of jobs that are, massively under billed, and dive into why that might be. So from just the analytics side, it's not replacing anybody, but it's making it simpler, a lot faster, and then with repeatability.
Yeah. You think you'll build more of your own AI tools yourselves, or do you think you'll look to buy solutions, or some balance of both?
So we've again, early adopters of probably stuff that was not ready. One of them was an estimating software where the idea is that you could put in a set of drawings and it would essentially do the takeoff. So it would give you length of foot of pipe, elbows, length of duct, things of that nature. The problem is, and we mentioned this before, is drawings are never perfect.
Right.
And so if it's not complete from A to Z on a piece of pipe, it breaks D, it doesn't know what to do because it doesn't have a size, or maybe there's, an error in the engineering and it's just this little gap. And so it can't like figure out how to move on.
Yeah.
For 2 years, we struggled with that, and we've essentially
tried for 2 years. That's impressive.
We've essentially abandoned like that for now. But the one that we are in the process of making ourselves, and we just started this process like maybe 2 weeks ago with a ChatGPT enterprise license, is a codebook agent. So essentially the GPT only knows mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire, building code, current and past. And the idea is that we can take a set of drawings, feed it to the agent, and then it will give us like plan check responses. That is totally, we just started.
So you can almost like preemptively know where the flags are going to come from in the permit process.
Yeah. Ideally get ahead and reduce or minimize plan check comments is sort of the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting for us on the, like our side as a software company is AIs. I mean, it's already here. Like, and you know, usually any technology evolution has to do with like coding is going to be the first thing that like expands, rapidly from it. And you've seen this for the last like 20 years, like the ecosystem of tools to support engineers is so much more evolved and advanced and broad than it is for like construction, right? Because when an engineer has a problem, like, and there's so many engineers, people are going to like solve their own problems, right? And so that's where so many software companies for engineers have like spun out of. And I think the same is with like AI, like it's getting unbelievably good at writing software code.
Yep.
But the other thing that we're noticing is you actually have to optimize your code base like for AI. And you have to kind of like rethink from first principles, like what are the easiest coding patterns or structure or architecture, or how do you organize the agent, markdown files and all this stuff so that AI can work well with it.
Sure.
And it kind of seems like with drawings, we're going to need to sort of rethink it from first principles as well. It's because it's you getting the same old drawing and having AI try and interpret it. That probably isn't going to be the ultimate solution. It's probably going to be solved further upstream, where an engineer first draws that drawing with some type of AI workflow behind it in mind, is what it seems like to me would be the other thing that needs to change.
Yeah. So yeah, Autodesk is making a tremendous investment into just that. They want to take the whole design process from end to end and essentially produce a permit or construction ready set of drawings, taking the engineer, more or less out of it. And that doesn't surprise me, and it will happen. And that will be a disruptor in our industry. It's going to eliminate some jobs, but maybe they've just become more of a QA, QC and management of that process, specifically as it relates to electrical, fire, and plumbing. Those are very code-driven trades. HVAC is super unique in that code does not dictate how you approach a cooling or heating solution. There's guidelines to keep things anchored properly and making sure that we've got enough airflow in certain areas. But in terms of the system type, that can vary. And so engineers that currently do a lot of drafting today, go through iterative pump selections, fan selections, equipment selections. I think that kind of goes by the wayside by AI, because once you've kind of got your system type figured out, from there it's very prescriptive, and I can see that being replaced at some level.
Yeah. That makes tons of sense. And I just remember my clash detection coordination meetings, walking through, clash by clash with a room of people. God knows how many salaries we had, being spent in this like 3-hour long clash detection meeting. And you just have to think that's going to start to melt away, because an AI with the best costs, train it on how to optimize for cost and quality and all this stuff. It's like, they're gonna be able to make a lot of those decisions effectively instantly, and then flag the ones that need debate or, human in the loop to like triage.
Exactly.
So, I don't know, this is our first episode, so maybe the audience isn't going to be very big, but since you do have an audience, I'd be curious like what your message would be for like general contractors who are obviously almost every project has an HVAC contractor. What do you see goes when projects go really well? What does the GC do well when it comes with HVAC coordination, collaboration, and stuff like that? And then what are like the things that, like, I don't know, if you spot happening early on, like your spidey senses tell you this job's gonna, or maybe your data tells you this job's going to go south. What are your thoughts on that?
Easy answers. It's sequence. Rightfully so. A lot of times we're brought into the projects early, right? We've got a lot of clients who know they want something done. They just don't know what yet. And so they're going to bring us in and start the design ahead of them knowing exactly what the building is going to be at the end. We live in Silicon Valley, and tech's changing ever so quickly. Even if we get a job and we're working on it 6 months in, that can completely change. Apple decides not to do the car anymore, and that building that we were building for the car is completely stopped and gutted and made for something else. That happens all the time. When jobs go well, the GC really understands the proper sequence of how things should go. We should not start clash detection until the building structurals figured out. How deep are those beams? How wide are they? What are the column spacing? Where things start to go really poorly is if we start clash before those are solid, and then we're redoing clash and we're doing it again. And then they're getting behind on schedule. So they're starting to build ahead of us having a finished model.
Yeah.
And then that snowballs into, we got to get walls up fast. And so then it completely hoses the trades that need to go above all these walls and ceilings. And then we have to work around, framed wall.
Yeah. On that note, what I've seen on several jobs is we get the structural engineers, structural steel drawings, and, maybe they're, who knows what evolution they're in, but they're like more or less solid. And I think what we see too is there's like a lack of coordination sometimes between the structural engineer and the architect. That happens frequently. But then what also happens is once we award the steel drawings, then we go into like shop drawings and fabrication drawings. And then they prove out that like a lot of the things either the structural engineer designed or the architect wants to have with like the framing around the steel is totally wrong as well.
Sure.
And I think a lot of that's a function of the other big challenge I see in the industry, which it probably impacts you guys further downstream. It's just so many things, steel included, being deferred to like a shop drawing phase.
Right.
Which is great because it's like, hey, there's collaboration. Like we can bring these people in, and like we want to bring trade partners in to bring the experts in the room. But when you do that, it almost like by definition means that you're going to be designing parts of the building well after award. You're going to be trying to release the steel, trying to release the HVAC equipment. I've been out of the game for like 7.5 years. Is that still, you still see that manifest a lot?
100%. Yes. With supply chain problems, and it's not done. We've got a tariff situation. We've got the data center explosion. And so a lot of times they'll decide on something that exists, a beam that does work, but maybe they can't get it for 18 months.
Right.
So then rather than delay the project or wait for that beam, they may decide we'll just get the next deeper beam without thinking about what about all the mechanical electrical and plumbing that needs to go below that beam. Did anybody let the architect know their ceiling is going to have to lower 6 inches?
Yeah.
No, a lot of times. So that is a challenge. I think it will always be a challenge. I think AI will probably be able to, aggregate all that data and decide, like you said, flag these beams are, yes, they exist, but you can't get them for 18 months. If you chose this one, you could get it in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The AI is going to be sophisticated enough to, at some point, not only do the design, but do a cost analysis and then be able to build a schedule where it optimizes sequences.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, totally. I mean, and that's like our vision of layering an AI to like the change order process, but that's just one process of many. And ultimately the root cause comes back to the faster you can make decisions, the faster you can like de-risk the project and move things forward.
Yep.
And what you're describing is on like, yeah, like the procurement design cycle. But then at the same time, like once you've awarded all those contracts, what we see is like, okay, well, now you're in a contract. So now you're tracking actual changes to a contract, which is like the change order process. And just to get a design change sent out to subcontractors, you know, the responses back, review them, package them, then present them to an owner, that decision cycle just gets delayed literally by the paperwork and the, you know, dotting the T's and crossing the I's, and just so it can get to the owner to make a decision. And then there's a whole nother cascade back down of like comments and revisions and things like that. And I think if that's one thing AI can do for our industry is help us reduce cycle times on the like making these decisions, and then help us hopefully make decisions faster.
Yeah, agreed.
So I got a couple more questions for you here, and then we'll probably wrap up. I guess the high level question too is like, for someone who's starting their career, project engineer, maybe they're a PM now, and they have, you know, a vision of like doing what you did or starting their own company, or maybe they don't know yet. How would you encourage them to like think about like what should they be doing in their day-to-day job to set themselves up for success either within that company or, you know, going the entrepreneurial path someday in the future?
If they have an entrepreneurial spirit, this is obviously the best industry for it. You know, I always like to tell college kids that getting to the project executive level, you're essentially a small business unit.
Totally.
That's what I experienced at my previous employer. Didn't want to offer me ownership. We happen to do that. And so if that's something that somebody's highly interested in, I would recommend going that path. It's not for everybody, and they don't want to be that project executive. So they can be an awesome senior project manager and just manage projects and earn a good living. And most in our area and our industry are going to be on, you know, some sort of performance compensation when it comes to job profitability and revenue and whatnot. So you can make a good living doing it. But if leading people is something you're truly passionate about, there's an opportunity. It does not stop at the senior PM level, and you get to that project executive, and you're going to career fairs, you're hiring people, you're mentoring them, you're building your team out as this little business. We happen to reward that with the opportunity to buy shares. Like I mentioned, Blaine is retiring. It is not Brian and mine's intention to continue to increase our ownership percentage. We'll be bringing in or bringing up current holders and possibly even a couple of new ones. That said, Brian and I do more or less provide all the strategic direction. And we do meet with the other shareholders once a year and kind of go through that vision. And as a group, we decide on what things we're going to target. My suggestion with kids that are coming out of college is really look at the opportunity you have, 4, 5, 6 years from now at the company you're looking at, rather than just that salary day one.
Yeah.
It's always been, my dad taught me this when I was really young. It's a military term, but train your replacement. Just because Blaine is retiring is not a bad thing. That opens up the doors. That lets me oversee now different aspects of the business, including service and the different departments, our quick response, our plumbing group. And that opens up an opportunity for one of my PXs, David, to move into a VP role, right? So he's more or less handling the audit of now the project managers. That opened up a PX spot. So we have 2 more PXs now as a result of this movement. And so a company that's forward-thinking enough around the movement, rather than just telling you that to be satisfied with like kind of where you're at, I think is huge.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing too is I'd be curious to get your take on is like, we met because we happened to work on a job together. I mean, we probably would have crossed paths in other ways, but we worked well together professionally. We became personal, close friends. And I really leveraged you in those early days to like learn about the HVAC world, because I knew that, I was not planning to start a software company. And I just thought to myself, like, I should just become as best of an expert as I can in, each of these key trade verticals that we work with. Sure. And, for me, my thinking was, well, leverage people I know and trust and take them out to lunch and like pick their brain. I was probably quite annoying with all the questions I asked, but I really wanted to like absorb as much as I could. So because I didn't know where my career was going to take me. Right. Sure. And as it turns out, my knowledge of HVAC is like sort of practical because like we're actually dealing with an HVAC issue in our office right now. And I can talk to the technician about it, but it's a little less practical when you're leading a software company. But more so what it did for me was just create tons of relationships, right? So when I started my company, I had like people who wanted to beta test, but I also had people that I could go sell the software to and get feedback from. And that's really what, the springboard for Clearstory was. And so you never know where life's going to take you. And it's like, you might as well invest in yourself and try and up-level yourself because you just don't know what the future holds. Like you could be working with a trade partner and find out that, their ownership group is changing and they are looking for young, hungry people to come in, and opportunities might spring up anywhere, and I think that's why, as a young person, like just invest in yourself, which also means relationships and making your company better, your role better, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the construction is a massively relationship driven business. No job's the same, never going to be the same. I don't care if they're copying a building and putting it from here to here. There's going to be something different. You're going to have a bunch of challenges. And so you have to work with people in a manner that allows you to get the next job.
Yep.
As you mentioned, you're a good friend of mine. You introduced me to my wife.
I didn't know if you were going to mention that on the podcast. I did.
He did. I had to beg him for her number, but I finally got it.
Yeah.
But when I think through my career and like the people that I've worked with internally and externally, it makes me super proud and just insanely happy to know that I get to go to work with people that I like. I get to go to work with friends. I mean, I can't tell you the number of weddings I've been to, first births, just celebrating wins and losses together, regardless of if they're a client or they're, an employee. At the end of the day, we are people.
Yep.
We have to work together. And I think the main reason that I get up every day is to see the success of the people around me, whether they're external or internal.
Yeah.
That's my main focus on what I work on every day. People around me are just getting better.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Well, that maybe will lead into my last question, which is 5 years from now, what's one thing you really want to see change in construction? And then what's one thing you don't ever want to see change? You can take either order.
Yeah. I don't want to see the people part of this go away. Yeah. So like we talked about with the AI, I hope we don't become a commodity, because we aren't. I don't think we ever will be a pure commodity. There's still guys that are going to have to install this stuff. There's still people that are going to have to maintain it afterwards. There's still changes that are going to come up from our clients on the fly that I think, we're going to need to adapt to. I really hope that the people component, the secret sauce of what SVM is in our people, isn't removed by AI.
Yeah.
What I do hope changes is that AI improves the thing that I mentioned, which is the sequencing. Being smart enough to know when something should be clashed or should be installed or shouldn't be installed. I hope that it helps improve the process. It takes a lot of the risk out. Good jobs and bad jobs are primarily a job that was sequenced properly, good job, and jobs that were not sequenced properly, bad job.
Yeah. Yeah. You also mentioned before we were chatting, just the amount of like systems and paperwork. You feel like it's like increased?
Oh, big time. Yeah. Being a PM today, I'd have a really hard time with it. It's just not my style to be pushing paperwork around. With these companies that they've gotten so sophisticated, they have a lot of stakeholders. That's like a big buzzword that have a lot of input, and they all want responses. So hopefully AI can help like organize those responses into, more fluid, easier to understand and cohesive process to like not have to have meetings on meetings about your meetings.
Yeah.
And I do hope that improves.
Yeah. Well, I guess to summarize it, what you're saying is, hopefully AI takes away the mundane paperwork, the system sprawl, and lets, our industry focus on the people.
Yeah.
So hopefully that pans out at least over the next 5 years. The next 10, 20 years, we'll see.
Who knows? The robots will probably be installing this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Ryan, thank you for coming on. Episode 1 in the books. I think that's the pod. Thank you, man.
You're welcome. Thanks, Cameron.